Welcome to the Resilient Retail Game Plan, a podcast for anyone wanting to start, grow or scale a profitable creative product business with me, Catherine Erdley. The Resilient Retail Game Plan is a podcast dedicated to one thing, breaking down the concepts and tools that I've gathered from 20 years in the retail industry and showing you how you can use them in your business. This is the real nuts and bolts of running a successful product business, broken down in an easy, accessible way. This is not a podcast about learning how to make your business look good. It's the tools and techniques that will make you and your business feel good. Confidently plan, launch and manage your products, and feel in control of your sales numbers and cash flow to help you build a resilient retail business. Hi everyone, it is episode number 166 of the Resilient Retail Game Plan. Hi, I'm your host, Catherine Erdley, as well as the founder of the Resilient Retail Club. The Resilient Retail Club is my membership group and mastermind for product businesses. You can find out more at resilientretailclub.com, and if you use the code 10podcast, that's 10podcast, you can get £10 off your first month in the membership. Today, I am joined by Katie Mitchell, who runs Scene Studios. We are going to have a really fascinating insight into what goes into planning a physical space for big brand names like Selfridges, Nike, but also why having a physical space is important for smaller brands as well. It was a really interesting conversation with Katie. I love getting into all of the detail as to what role a physical store can play for a retail brand, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Hi, Katie. It's so good to have you with me today. Do you want to start off by introducing yourself and also tell us a little bit about Scene Studios?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so I'm Katie Mitchell, the Managing Director of Scene Studios. Scene Studios is a design and production agency, and we work with global brands, everything from the Nikes of the world all the way through to, more luxury brands, Selfridges, Tory Burch, Jimmy Choo, and we work with them on basically making them show up as successfully as possible within retail. I guess the way that we've pivoted or we've tweaked or kind of shifted the way that we work over the last, I'd say 5 years. Traditionally, we've worked with them on design and production for physical spaces. So windows, it could be pop-ups, it could be thresholds, but very much in that in-store hemisphere. But over the last 5 years, due to many things, due to retail transforming, due to the pandemic, due to even just the requirements of the teams that we're working within retail, we've pivoted and added to our skill set in a sense of offering that 360. So not only looking at the physical retail space, but what does that space, from an experiential point of view, how does that space operate? So it doesn't necessarily just look amazing, but it also operates and keeps living on. So is it events? Is it activations? How do our consumers stay connected to these brands? And then also looking at content creation. So that's something else that the agency looks at, is how can we ensure that we're putting in the right content into these spaces that really align to what it's saying from a physical standpoint. On paper, it looks like a lot, but it's the full 360 of that retail landscape.
So I love these kind of debates because my business, when I first started it back in the day in 2018, it was actually called Future Retail. And that was because I was having so many conversations, and I used to run evening talks and things like that, all about the future of the retail landscape. And it's just such a fascinating subject. So I'm really interested to get into it with you today. And just to sort of touch on to begin with, I know that, for example, your tagline on your website, you talk about Scene Studios as being committed to changing the retail landscape. So what do you feel needs changing? And maybe how have you seen it change in the last few years?
As an agency, we're really passionate about the way that we work with our clients. And I guess our kind of commitment or promise is that we do try and shake up that landscape. I think historically retail has been measured on commercial numbers, for example. So sales per store, per market, per square meter, and that has been the leading focus. So from a commercial standpoint, how is retail measured and how is retail successful? And I guess that's still very much paramount and it's still at the peak of what retail is measured by. But the way that we achieve this is changing and it needs to continue to change. So, how are we achieving, those commercial numbers? It isn't just about drilling down into footfall or, looking at, I guess, prices from a commercial standpoint or how many products, were off the shelf at a certain point. That's still what we're trying to achieve, but the way that we're measuring this and achieving this is slightly different. And that's where our commitment is set, is to changing the way that I guess retail speaks to the client. So amazing in-store experiences, on point customer service, tapping into relevant communities to help build purpose in a certain city or market will almost fall in line with, consumers and how they trust the brand. They'll then, purchase and then not return any products bought. They'll build up that trust naturally and organically. And then the purchase kind of transaction comes slightly later down the line, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with brands a lot more about building loyalty. And I think that's another point or another space that we lean into when we talk about changing that retail landscape. It's really about building that community and building that loyalty piece with retail. So it's not just about getting people into store, it's about people trusting your brand and understanding your brand, whether it's, the brand values and morals, all the way through to understanding the product per se. But we want to ensure that we're disrupting the landscape in a meaningful way. So brands can talk to their consumers with, a lot more relevancy. Their language is the same as the people that they're talking to.
It's very interesting the way that you say that. So are you almost saying that the physical store is no longer or should no longer be measured purely on sales? It's more about a brand building exercise?
Yes and no. All the procurement teams out there and the CEOs and CFOs will be like, no, absolutely not. You need to continue to measure with numbers and commerciality. That is still very much a point of measurement from a commercial standpoint. And I guess on paper, that is what our marketing, budgets and our marketing investments needs to lead to. I guess what I'm saying is the route to that point is changing. And yes, I think there is a world where actually building out spaces that's just about brand building and brand education is important, is much more important than it has been. We're seeing a lot more brands today maybe building out spaces that aren't just about selling a product, they aren't just about a final transaction, but they're about, building up education about a product or the band. They're about building a community, getting people into a space and talking to them, connecting to them, engaging with them. And that person may then go online and make a purchase, but that in-store experience has been the motivator to go back online and purchase. So I guess it's twofold. What it leads with and then what it ends with. What it ends with is staying the same, but what it leads with is shifting.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I always think that one of the most striking things that anyone said to me recently in the last few years was I was doing a piece for Forbes on the future of the store, and it was a future store concept that had opened up in Shoreditch, and the people running it, I was interviewing them, and they said to me, needing to buy a product is no longer a good enough reason to go to a store. And it's one of those things that when you say it like that, it makes total sense, but equally so, it's like such a revolutionary concept, really, that it's like, stores, that was the purpose of going to a store for so many years, wasn't it? To go buy a product. And now we're saying, actually, you don't have to go to a store to buy a product. So therefore, what does the store become? And exactly as you said, it's like the manifestation of the brand in a physical space. I've heard the phrase brand temples used before. Would you almost see it like that?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've heard that saying as well. And almost being the magazine cover or the leading title or film title to a certain brand. Absolutely. And I think you're right in the sense of, what are those spaces? What do they mean now? And if we know, we almost need to, I guess retail's gone through a bit of a evolution in the sense of traditionally people went into stores, they bought things, they came out and they had a bag with a product inside. Then obviously we've had the evolution of digitalization, people going online, and obviously retail stores started to become, a little bit less relevant in that kind of 360 circle. And I think what we're seeing now is brands leaning into that and celebrating that and being like, okay, we now know that maybe the retail physical space isn't where these purchases are being made. We need to be clever with how we market, how we use these spaces to ensure they're still giving the right of return, but that return may be online rather than actually in the store. So what can we do with this space? What can we do with these physical representations of our brand to ensure they're still working really hard, but they may not have the output of that traditional walking out with a shopping bag? So we're seeing a lot more, really big brands, but also a lot more entry level brands leaning into this and celebrating it. And some brands are almost approaching the retail space in this way to start with.
No, I completely agree. And I think also as well, costs of acquisition have increased online. Customer retention, customer loyalty is harder to build digitally. The cost of returns is creeping up. And then it's almost like everyone's kind of going, do you know what's actually really efficient? Cost of last mile delivery, for example, to get the goods to people's doors. Someone's suddenly gone, do you know what's actually really effective is when you take all your stock and you put it in one place and your customer comes to you. It's like, that's a shop, isn't it?
Yeah.
But equally, but then it's kind of gone beyond that, because of course you can't rely on it just necessarily just being about that. Although obviously it's interesting, we're talking about retail. I work with a lot of independent retailers, multi-brand retailers, and they certainly are seeing sales coming through the door, but then that's often because they have built that loyalty, that community. But I'd love to explore a little bit more about digitally native brands and their need to have a physical presence. So why do you think it's so important for a brand that maybe was born online to actually move into a physical space? And can you give an example of how this has helped a digitally native brand?
Sure. I mean, obviously, as I've mentioned, we're of the digital era, and digital connectivity in retail has opened the door to small grassroots brands and means minor financial commitment for those brands as well. We can start a brand now on Instagram. Or, and many other apps, not just Instagram, but TikTok, Meta, and there's so many ways to market now because of digital and how that's evolved, which is amazing. It's brilliant. But what we've also seen, due to the pandemic and just this kind of turn of the clock of people wanting more from brands. It's easier to sell things in certain, in real life, people touching, want to experience a brand through all of the senses. They want to try things on. And so, although it doesn't need to be a safe space to sell from, just that physical representation that we can get from a brand is really important to build that loyalty, like, that word that we've said a lot. And we work and collaborate with a lot of digitally native brands, actually for some of our Nike experience work. Now, obviously, Nike has an online presence and an offline presence, but what we do is we do a lot of experiential work with them. And we actually work with digitally native brands to collaborate with, to amplify some of Nike's campaigns and products. So it could be that we work with a really bespoke jewelry brand and get them in to do a workshop with Nike consumers. And yes, that's not actually a retail space for that jewelry brand, but it's getting their name out there to the masses and helping them, I guess, generate a bit more brand awareness, a bit more brand education, and loyalty through that way. So that's one way that we work with digitally native brands, and to get them out there is actually partner with them with much bigger brands to give them a platform that they wouldn't normally get.
Yeah.
We also work with a lot of digital first brands that want to have their first retail space, their first physical space. And a couple of years back, actually, to start with an online, an app, so to speak, we actually work a lot with Selfridges. And the beauty of working with Selfridges is that we get to work with a lot of smaller brands that may want to make that jump from online to offline. And interestingly, one of the brands we worked with a few years back was Instagram. And they wanted a space where they showcased 8 of their app first fashion designers. And so we helped design and produce and manifest this space within Selfridges that actually celebrated 8 on-app brands in the real life. And that space was not only it looked amazing, but it provided that physical standpoint for these brands to showcase their work, to tell their story, to invite people to that space. They did a Q&A and, a session where people could ask questions about their brands and learn more about their journey on the app. So it was a really kind of exciting and new way that we've worked with online brands and bringing them to, a luxury space such as Selfridges. And then I guess lastly is the more traditional way that we've been working with native tech brands is, as I mentioned, bringing those online brands to offline. So we've done that with Nietzsche, which is an apparel brand. They are really big online. They have an amazing relationship with the likes of ASOS. So they sell wholesale and they have a really strong online presence. And we actually work with them to design and produce their first physical store on the outskirts of London.
How do you spell Nietzsche? Just so you can go stalk them afterwards.
Sure, NICCE.
Okay.
Nice with an extra C. It speaks to the Gen Z. So it's got a real defined, I'd say, core client database. So they knew that online worked really well for them, but they came to us and were like, we need to show up in the physical now. And, it was their jump into their first retail store. And so actually we work with them really closely on the DNA and the DNA of the core brand, making sure the materials were on point, that everything made sense. We also then work with them on their office space in Shoreditch. And, we included things like a bar, a coffee space that people could go to. If they were going there for meetings, they could hang out in this space because that was really important for them. There was a DJ booth because actually the brand was born out of music. And so we needed to ensure that spoke to buyers that were going into the space as well. So more recently, we've worked with Mr. Jones Watches, who are predominantly online, and they had a small retail space on the South Bank. And they came to us because they had an opportunity just behind Carnaby Street. And that was a really exciting project as well, because again, we worked really closely with that brand and actually the founder of the brand to ensure that we were speaking online to offline really well. We had to get into the details of how the watches worked. They have a beautiful story about they collaborate with illustrators. So it was, how do we get that story across? So the actual store itself is emblazoned with amazing illustrations, lots of color. The whole shop looks like an eye into the kind of technicals of a watch. It's all very circular. So it was just really embodied what that brand meant and what it stood for in terms of the collaborations it made, and then from a technical side.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful store. I saw on your website. So I'm going to link in the show notes. I'll put the link to your website, and definitely for anyone listening, go take a look and have a look at some of the projects. And Mr. Jones Watches, funnily enough, their workshop, I'm endlessly fascinated by them because their workshop is literally around the corner from my house. I walk past it all the time. So then when I saw you'd done a physical space for them, I was like, oh my goodness, that's such a great tie-in. But I can totally see, and again, it's hard to explain this, so everyone go take a look at Seed Studios. You'll see what I mean. It's just such a beautiful space and such a just immersive, I suppose. Is that the right word for it? Really just kind of getting people literally inside the brand.
Totally. And it's interesting you mentioned the workshop, because that was part of the project process, was actually going to their workshop, seeing how they work, listening to the team, understanding the process behind the design of the watch, how the watch is built, and then really pulling that into the physical space. So how can we represent this? So we've got like beautiful moments where there's areas that are magnified. So you look through a magnifying glass and you can see really the workings of different watches and, different illustrations. So totally that. It's about, our process is about understanding the client and understanding that brand, just like they want a consumer to understand it, and then designing with that in mind to ensure that consumers are understanding them as much as we do.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting you mentioned Gen Z when it came to Nietzsche. This is often one of the things that people say, Gen Z, they just want to shop online. But But I mean, I have two teenagers and they love nothing more than to go out for the day shopping. So what's been the experience of the younger demographic in the physical store?
Yeah, I think they've actually played a really big part in transforming retail in the last few years. A lot of the brands that we work with, the Gen Z is typically the person or the consumer demographic that they want to tap into.
Mm,
So it's always, we want to talk to the Gen Z more, help us. We
mm,
don't feel that we're hitting the mark with Gen Z. What can we do? What can we be doing to really connect with this demographic? Because actually, a lot of what they stand for is a lot of what we need to be, I guess, being mindful of when we design spaces now. They want to feel understood. They want to feel listened to. They have really strong points of view. They've, been brought up in a world of change when it comes to digitalization, when it comes to politics.
mm-hmm,
So they have, a real, I guess, understanding of, economic shifts as well as other more retail based shifts that we need to, I guess, respond to when we're designing spaces. And they're really the demographic that are after this community based piece. And I talk about
mm,
community and loyalty a lot
mm-hmm.
because, again, that is really the space that we want to lean into when we want, when we're successfully designing for clients. And Nike, I mentioned Nike and Converse and actually Timberland as well that we work with do this really well because they have almost taken the focus away from product and they've moved it and shifted it onto loyalty and trust. They've moved it onto this demographic and they're now just speaking directly to them. So instead of having a campaign that's just about a product, they're having a campaign that's just about their communities and how they can tap into that community more.
Just goes to show how important that community piece is then.
Absolutely.
I'm really
Absolutely.
curious because you mentioned community a lot, talked about loyalty community and then the need for that in the physical space. So when you're building a physical space, which I'm assuming almost every physical space you're building, you're thinking about community as well. But how do you actually translate that into a design? Are there certain elements? How do you capture that in a physical space that sort of need to build community on a practical level?
It's a really good question, actually. And we've got a really lovely example in a Nike dance project that we did last year with Nike. And we were about to do the second iteration of this year. So Nike Dance was a project that we did towards the end of last year, and it was specifically for Nike Town London, so
Mm-hmm,
their flagship in Oxford Circus.
mm-hmm,
And we're about to do the second iteration for not only the London demographic, but also the House of Innovation in Paris. So two slightly different consumer databases, but the same, I guess, campaign.
mm-hmm.
And what we did there is it was all about building community and it was all about connecting to their consumer in the right way. So the Nike Dance in collaboration with Air Force One was released as a series of events that ran over a month's worth of programming. So what we had to do as a design and production agency and their leading partner was design and produce that space in a way that it could not only look amazing, but live for that whole month to cater for product purchasing, events. We had dance classes, we had workshops. You could get hair braiding done, you could get tooth gems fitted, you could join a dance class for an hour and sweat until you couldn't move no more. And we designed the space from a commercial standpoint and then also from that experiential standpoint. So first of all, it was all about flexibility. We needed to ensure that we were designing the space with flexibility in mind. So all of the fixtures and fittings were designed in a way that they could be broken down, they could be moved. So during the
Mm-hmm.
week, the store looked like a normal store setup. You could buy product, you could explore the campaign in that sense. And then at the weekend, we shifted and moved all of the fixtures and reconfigured them to the side. And Nike Town London turned into a dance floor. The whole of the ground floor turned into a dance
Wow.
studio. And they invited different dancers in. We had different classes going on. And so there was a mirror on the back wall that actually during the week had graphics on it. But then from a digital standpoint, it transformed into a mirror that replicated people's dance moves. We had a TikTok station that was there during the week. So if you came in ad hoc with maybe some of your mates, you could do a TikTok in front of the TikTok station. But then during the dance activations, that moved to the side and was for people not taking part in the dance sessions. We also had a live art mural going on that was live throughout the dance sessions. But then during the week, when it was a commercial space, just sat as a really beautiful mural on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was about that flexibility and being able to transform that space to sit as an experiential space, to build that community piece all the way through to a commercial space. And during the week as well, we had the main dance floor area was actually just like a hangout space for Gen Zs and for people with their friends to come down to Nike Town London, explore the product, but then also just hang out and be and dance, even if there wasn't a class going on. So they got a really nice fine balance between the two.
So it sounds like the key is flexibility, knowing what you want the space to be used for, and then just having ways to encourage the use.
Totally. And, it's all about being clever with the marketing. The reason we were doing this Nike dance was actually to build on their membership. So that was the kind of main KPI out of this, was to get people engaged in the Nike membership. And so to sign up to the sessions, you had to become a Nike member. Yeah, it was a real, a real success story, because not only were they building up that loyalty and that brand community, they were also giving back. And they were giving back to these dance groups and these talents and inviting them into their space to collaborate.
I love it. No, that sounds brilliant, and such a varied use of space. So I'm going to come on to my final question to you, which is a bit of a big one. So I appreciate this probably could be a whole long conversation all in itself. So let's say somebody's listening to the podcast and they maybe have a physical space, maybe they're an independent retailer, or maybe they're a brand that's online, but they're getting ready to have a space of their own. Maybe it's a pop-up, or even if it's a stand or a stall at an event. If they're thinking, right, that sounds brilliant, I totally get the need to bring my brand into the physical space, where do you even start?
Yeah, that is a good question. It's quite a heavy question.
A heavy question.
Yeah.
just to start, just give us a start of a 10,
Sure, no, of course. I guess it's about staying true to who they are as a brand. And you don't always have to lead with your product. And I know that may sound counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
You need to let the space speak about your values, about your USP, the benefits, and the community and the product will almost follow.
Mm-hmm.
When consumers buy into your brand, they'll naturally buy into your product. And I'd also just be conscious of where you're perhaps going to show up and see if there's anything clever that you can do with supporting the existing community, giving back, supporting local charities, putting on localized events and partnering with local talents. We know that, I've just given an example of Nike, but we know that bigger brands are also tapping into that as well. And I think, it's about tapping into the brand's values, but also that localization piece as well is really important. So yeah, I don't know if that really gives you a straightforward answer, but it's about staying true to you and like I say, not just starting with the product. It isn't just about selling that product and how that product's going to look. It's about selling your brand, your core brand DNAs and values. It's about jotting those down to start with. Get out your, if you have one or if you don't have one, I'd advise you pull together a bit of a branding document, a do's and don'ts. What is your brand versus what isn't your brand? And that's basically what your space needs to live by as well.
Yeah.
And, don't worry if you don't have a window. Traditionally, big stores would have window displays and that would be the real pull. But actually, a lot of brands leave their windows empty now. And it's about seeing into that space and ensuring that people are curious and they want to, drop in and learn more. So, be confident that the activity that's going on in the store will pull people in anyway. We're also seeing a lot of brands have their office spaces or have desks in retail spaces now.
Yes.
To give a bit of a behind the curtain view of what that brand's about. Entry level brands may not be able to afford an office and a store. So why not double it up?
Yeah.
Why not use that space for both things? And it actually becomes just a really lovely talking point for your brand. People are like, oh, what? So this is actually where the magic happens.
Yes.
You're working from this space.
Especially if you're doing something that's visually appealing, like pouring candles or...
100%. Yeah. So many amazing brands. Earl of East do that really well.
Mm-hmm.
They traditionally made candles and now they've got loads of stores, in Hackney and Cold Drops Yard. And they started with that, that candle making, and then you could go to workshops. And now that's just, they collaborate with some amazing brands in that sense. That's a really nice example. We've also worked with a glasses brand as well before. And even just like all of the way that the glasses were made, that was all done on site.
Oh, wow.
Site servicing was all done on site, but out in the open. So, they had these amazing machines on show. And actually it just brought a bit of theatre and drama back into the retail space at no extra cost, because it was stuff that they were doing anyway.
Yeah.
It is just about building up that value and trust through being really authentic about what your brand stands for. And I think that can be achieved by just going back to the basics of why you developed that brand in the first place.
Great advice. And thinking about, I love the idea of the do's and the don'ts. So then making sure that you understand, because it could be as simple as saying, most people I'm sure have gone through this thought process, but if you're a sustainable brand, then you've got to think about what you're packaging and the materials that you're using in your space, what that's going to be. But that can be a good starter, just thinking about, the brand, what does the brand represent? And then you starts giving you some ideas about what that means in the physical space. Well, thank you so much, Kate. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been absolutely brilliant. Do you want to just finish us up by telling people where they can find out more about Scene Studios?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. So Scene Studios is online at scene-studios.com. We also have an Instagram page, which is Scene Studios _. We're also really active on LinkedIn, which is Scene Studios. And my LinkedIn profile is Katie Mitchell. And we're also on Facebook, which is also Scene Studios. So hopefully that should be quite easy to find. But yeah, give us a follow, give us a like. We love comments. We love interacting with new people. So yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. Why not head over to Resilient Retail Club at Resilient Retail Club on Instagram. Let me know what you thought about today's episode. If you have a physical space, what were your key takeaways? I really enjoyed it. It was such a fascinating insight into the way that physical space is changing its use for retailers, and I hope that you enjoyed it too. If you have a moment, please head over to Apple Podcasts, if that's what you use, and rate and review the podcast. It makes such a huge difference when it comes to getting the podcast out to more people. If you're listening in Spotify, you can also rate the podcast within the app. And of course, if you subscribe or follow the podcast, you'll be the first to know about every new episode that comes out each week on a Thursday. Until next week, bye. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, then I invite you to check out resilientretailclub.com. The Resilient Retail Club is the membership for anyone wanting to start, grow, or scale a profitable product business. No more trawling Google trying to find the answers to your questions or wading through general business advice that speaks mainly to service-based businesses. Whether you're still at the idea stage or you've been going for a while but want to get more focused and organised when it comes to your business, the Resilient Retail Club is the place for you. With a library of courses tailored to creative product businesses, several live sessions a month, and a supportive and active community, the Resilient Retail Club is the perfect membership to help you hit your goals faster. Check it out at resilientretailclub.com.